Hello, friends. Welcome back to my podcast, Falling Forward. I'm your host, Janie Marty, and I'm really grateful that you're here with me today. Today's episode is for anyone who is in a season where things don't make sense. And I feel like we've all been there. I certainly have. I think part of me is still there right now. Sometimes we feel like we're praying for things to happen, for things to come into fruition, for circumstances to change, for miracles to take place. Sometimes we just feel like we're praying and God is silent. And in my first episode, I mentioned the story of Job. Really, the story of Job is a story of a godly man overcome by catastrophe. And if you've ever been there, you can raise your hand in the comfort of your living room, car, workplace, wherever you're listening to this from. I think most of us have been in a place before where we feel like we're doing everything right, quote unquote right, but things just aren't panning out in our favor. But the story of Job is beyond the story of a godly man overcome by catastrophe. It's also the story about suffering and how God's wisdom is higher than ours, and our faith must rest in who He is and not in what He does. And that's what today's episode is going to be about. The story of Job in the beginning, and I'm really going to focus on the very beginning of the story of Job because there's quite a few things that I think we can take from the book of Job. But in the very beginning, we as the reader come to understand that there's some things happening up in heaven that Job isn't privy to. He has no idea that these things are happening. But we know as a reader that there's something going on that he doesn't understand. And it's the reason why all of these bad things are happening to him. So we're going to set the scene. At the very beginning of Job, so we're going to go all the way back to chapter 1. And I want to start off by just setting the scene here. Literally, verse 1 of chapter 1 says, "There was a man in the land of Oz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil." So we set the scene, we introduce our main character, Job, and we establish that Job was a upright, righteous, blameless man who loved God, feared Him. And then the next couple of verses go on to tell us that he had wealth, he had 10 children, he had a wife, he had servants. He was blessed in many, many ways. And he wasn't just blessed, he would also steward the things that God had given him. So every night he would present burnt offerings to God, just in case his kids had sinned, just in case they had done something to offend God. Then scripture tells us that up in heaven, God and Satan are having a conversation. And God brags about Job. And he says this. The Lord said to Satan, this is chapter 1, verse 8. The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house, and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. There is a lot to unpack here. We're going to just start from the beginning. The Lord brags about Job. He tells Satan, "Have you seen Job? Have you seen how great he is? Have you seen how wonderful and godly and righteous this man is? Have you seen how much he loves me? Look at him. Look at my servant Job." And I just want to stop and Think for a moment how many of us would want to be spoken about by God in this way. So Job was truly an honorable man for God to speak about him that way. But of course, remember, Job doesn't know this. He doesn't know that this conversation happened. This conversation happens in heaven. Job is on earth. There's way too much physical and spiritual distance between him and heaven to know that this conversation took place. Job doesn't know that heaven knows his name. He doesn't know that God is proud of him. He doesn't know that God sees his integrity. And that's important because Job's suffering begins without explanation. There's no precursor. He doesn't do anything and then all these bad things happen to him. He's just down on earth, living his life, being a godly man, doing all the right things. From Job's perspective, his life from here on is going to collapse. It's going to fall apart. Okay? But let's go back to verse 9. So God is bragging about Job, and Satan says, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." So Satan now presents the question. He always does this, doesn't he? He did this in the Garden of Eden. He's doing it again here. He has to plant the seed of doubt everywhere he goes. And the seed of doubt is, well, yeah, I mean, he loves you because you've been so good to him. You've put a hedge around him. And when he says hedge, really what he means is, well, you're protecting him. You know, you've blessed him. You've given him money and servants and a wife and all these healthy kids. And you've blessed everything that he's ever done. So of course he loves you. You've never given him a reason not to love you. And in Satan's mind, right, because he's Satan, it's inconceivable that a man would ever serve God for pure faith without any kind of motive, without any kind of expectation of receiving something in return. So that's important to know because this is the question that Satan plants. And this conversation, once again, is happening up in heaven. So we can imagine that God and Satan are having this conversation. There's all these angels and demons, right, that are watching this go down. They're aware of this conversation. So when the Lord says to Satan, do your worst, that's essentially what he says, right? Okay, do your worst. I want to clarify something here. When God says, do your worst, he doesn't just say, have at it, it's a free-for-all, do whatever you want to do. No, he says, do your worst within the limitations that I'm giving you. Because God still offers Job protection, right? He's not allowing Satan to kill him. He's allowing him to move forward because now God has a point to prove in heaven. He needs to show the heavenly realm, the angels and the demons, that a man can be faithful to God because he loves him, not because it's what's best for him or in his best interest. So this is how the story of Job is set up. Once again, I want to reiterate, whatever happens next, which really, really sucks. I mean, think about your worst day ever and now multiply that by 1,000,000, and that's Job's worst day. Because what happens next is, and this all happens in the same moment, probably within like 2 minutes from each other, right? We know that a messenger comes to Job. Now we're looking at verse 13 on. So there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabines fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, and this is by far the worst one. There came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. I mean, just reading that just makes my heart heavy, because I can't even imagine what that must feel like. You know, have you ever been at work and you realize that you have so much going on, and that at the time that you have so much going on, somebody calls you with some piece of bad news, and then on your way home, somebody like rear ends you, and you're just thinking to yourself, why is this day this awful? I'm so overwhelmed. I can't believe I've had this string of bad luck. Now, I want you to put that in perspective with Job's worst day ever, because this trumps anything that you could ever imagine, right? And that's not to say that your suffering doesn't matter. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm trying to put this in perspective. Like when I was reading this, I just sat back and said, okay, I mean, that's pretty awful. I can't even imagine what I would do next. But you know what Job does next? Verse 20. It says, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. That's a very surprising response to hearing that you've lost your wealth, you've lost all of your animals, you've lost all of your servants, you've lost all of your kids. I mean, it cannot get worse. But it does, my friends, it does, because Job doesn't respond in the way that Satan wants him to. He doesn't. You know what he does? He worships God. He says, God, blessed be your name, which is a very unusual response to grief and pain and suffering, but that's what Job does. And I can't imagine that many of us would respond like that in a situation of that magnitude. But Job did. So in that moment, I can just imagine God up in heaven just feeling so much pride and feeling so reassured of Job in that moment, that even though he was being hit with the absolute worst day of his life, he still did not curse God. He still worshiped. He still said, blessed be your name. Of course, Satan wasn't happy about that, obviously. So in chapter 2, essentially, Satan says, well, you know what? It's easy to not curse God when all you're doing is attacking all these things that exist outside of Job, right? Like, well, we killed his kids and we destroyed his animals and his servants, and now he has no money and he has no children. And yeah, I mean, that's awful and all, which I'm obviously being sarcastic. This is awful beyond measure. But in Satan's mind, he's like, well, okay, it's not like we did anything to him. Like, his physical body is fine. Like, he didn't suffer physically. So I bet if I did that, then he would for sure curse you. And so God says, do your worst. Once again, within the parameters of, you can't kill him. I will not let you kill him. But do your worst. Job's chapter 2 goes on to tell us that Job proceeds to suffer really awful physical and emotional ailments. He has sores all over his body. His body is literally peeling off of him. So much so that he's like sitting outside in the dumpster, scratching his skin with a piece of metal. I mean, that's how uncomfortable he is in his body. Job suffers from sleeplessness. And I'm getting ahead of myself because there's a few other verses ahead in Job where we really get to know all of the different things that Job is suffering from. So he's suffering from painful sores. His skin is peeling off of his body. He's so itchy. He can't sleep. And then when he does sleep, he suffers from nightmares. He has difficulty breathing. He can't keep anything down. He's withering away. He's so skinny. He's depressed. Is he depressed, you guys? He is so depressed. Chapter 3 of Job. Chapter 3, verse 11 is one that always really sticks out to me. Job is talking to his 3 friends that came to comfort him, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But his 3 friends come to comfort him, and Job is just going on this long monologue about his suffering and how he's feeling. And he says, "Why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, or why the breast that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and been quiet, I would have slept, then I would have been at rest." And this is just one small little part of his long monologue where he's just going on a rant about how depressed he is and how much he wishes that he just didn't exist anymore because he is in such a miserable place. Physically, emotionally, this man has lost absolutely everything. And in the midst of all this, his wife is also not supportive. In fact, his wife basically says, why are you worshiping God? Look what he's doing to you. Look at what you're going through. And yet, Job doesn't do that. The biggest thing that I keep coming back to at the beginning of Job, because we know the conversation that happened in heaven, because we have this context that Job doesn't have, there are reasons for why things happen that we may not understand. There are things that God sees that we don't. There are reasons God understands that we can't yet comprehend. There are timelines that God is working within us that don't align with our urgency, with our personal timelines. And just like Job, we often experience the effects of something without knowing the cause, right? So Job is experiencing this intense physical, emotional, mental breakdown. His entire world has fallen apart. He himself is falling apart. And the next few chapters of Job, and we're going to get into this a little bit more in the next episode, really go in depth about how deeply frustrated Job felt. That in this moment, God seemed to be silent. God, who he relied on for his entire life, God, who he had come to know as a friend, was not responding to him. It seemed like God wasn't there. And we know, as the reader, that that's not what happened. We know that God was there. We know that God was present. We know that God was allowing these things to happen because it served a greater purpose, and God had never left him. But in these next few chapters, we see Job really start to break down, and he keeps coming back to the same thing. God, where are you? I know you're there. I know you're going to redeem me. I know you're going to take me out of this miserable existence that I'm in. I know you're going to fix it. But where are you? I don't hear you. I need to know that you're listening to me. I need to know that you're still with me. That is Job's biggest frustration in the next few chapters of his book. And sometimes it can feel like God isn't responding to us in a timely fashion, right? We want answers, we want clarity, we want reassurance, but we don't always get it in our timeline. Sometimes we have to wait. Sometimes what we're asked to do instead is just trust that there is a reason behind everything that's happening. And this is something I love about Job. Job is the most real guy. I mean, And I'm not saying that there's plenty of real people in the story of the Bible that are very relatable. But you know what I love about Job? I love that he doesn't pretend that the pain doesn't exist. He's not sitting there like, oh, it's okay, I have faith, and God is, he's gonna be with me, and everything's gonna be okay, and I just gotta have faith, and God gives the toughest battles to the strongest soldiers. You guys, I actually hate that expression. Can somebody please burn it? Stop saying that to people. But Job isn't saying that. No. When he got the news that his children were dead and that he had lost everything else, the Bible says that Job rose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to the ground. In those times when you tore your robe and you shaved your head, that was a symbol of grief. So it wasn't that Job was like, yeah, okay, it's fine. I know God's with me. He's going to fix it for me. He's going to give me more kids. He's going to give me more money. He's going to resolve all of these problems for me. I have so much faith. No. He was in pain. He was well aware that there was serious grief happening in his life in this moment. So we don't need to pretend that pain doesn't exist. That's not real. That's not authentic. We don't need to deny grief. We don't need to deny suffering. We don't need to sugarcoat our experience. We can say that we're in pain. We can say that we're going through a difficult time. We can say that we're in a dark place, that we're in physical, emotional pain. We can admit that. Job admitted that. Job felt abandoned. He felt unheard. He felt confused. And he was so real because when he spoke to God in the way that I think all of us should speak to God, just like a real person. He wasn't speaking to God in this like super formal, contained way. Like, well, I can't say that to God. I can't tell God that I feel abandoned by him. It's going to offend him. No. Job said that. He's like, hey, are you listening to me? Do you even care that I'm in pain? Are you watching what's happening to me? But through all this, he never lets go of the belief that God will eventually reveal himself. He never abandons the blind faith that eventually God will give him an out of this, that God will eventually show up and fix what's happening. He knows that that's what's going to happen. He knows that he's walking with God. Even when God is silent, Job believes that God is still just. Even when there's no resolution yet, Job believes that redemption is coming. Even when everything is taken from him, Job believes that God still sees him. At one point, Job declares that he knows that his Redeemer lives and that one day he will stand restored. I'm going to see if I can find that exact verse because I have the Bible in front of me. Okay, I found that verse. It's in Job chapter 19, verse 25. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at last he will stand upon the earth. So Job had complete faith. This is anchored faith. He knew that God would restore him, that God was there, that he wasn't really gone. He just hadn't heard from him. He had felt like God was silent for a period of time. So I want to go back to how we apply this to our own lives and our modern Job moments to a somewhat smaller scale, because we can all agree that losing all your children in one day is the absolute worst thing that could happen to any of us, right? But when we have a relationship that ends suddenly and you're left with all these questions and no closure, when you lose a job or an opportunity that you prayed for and you believed was meant for you and it doesn't work out, or you get fired or you get laid off, and you're just questioning what God's purpose was there, when you're doing everything right, but you still feel like life is unraveling, when healing takes longer than you expected, emotionally, spiritually, physically, when you're diagnosed with an illness, a chronic illness, a terminal illness, something that affects your entire quality of life. These are all moments where it feels like God is quiet during a season. a season that you need him the most. In those moments, it's easy to think, did I do something wrong? Did God just forget about me? Why would he allow this to happen? Remember, chapter 1 of Job says that Job was a blameless man. It says that Job was good. God loved Job. So when God is silent, it doesn't mean that he's absent. When God delays something, it doesn't mean that he's denying us that thing. When we're suffering, it doesn't mean that God doesn't favor us. Really, the story of Job reminds us that you can be a good and righteous and godly person and you can still suffer. There's no direct correlation. We want to think that there is because it would be easier, right? If it was like that, then we would all be Christians, because if somebody came to you and gave you the recipe for life and said, hey, all you got to do is read the Bible, pray, go to church, be a good Christian, and everything in your life is going to work out from here on out. Don't you think more people would be Christian? Because they would just think, okay, well, if this is the guarantee recipe for success in life, I'm going to go do it. The problem is that God doesn't guarantee that. Jesus doesn't say, come and follow me and bear your cross, and life is going to be wonderful and perfect and everything for you will work out every single time. Life is still going to be painful. You're still going to go through seasons that are difficult, but you're not doing it alone. You're doing it with God. And in some ways, I think that's kind of beautiful, because it kind of goes back to our freedom of choice. If you don't have a guarantee that everything will be perfect in your life just because you choose to follow God, then your choice to follow God comes from a genuine place of love and faith. It doesn't come from a self-serving place. It comes from a place of wanting to please him, because once you're loved like that, you can't imagine losing it. Sometimes the very thing that you're enduring is connected to something far bigger than you can see right now. Sometimes when you're going through a waiting season, you're going through a difficult season, and you think, I don't understand this, but I still trust you. I don't see the full picture, but I don't need to. I haven't heard you yet, but I know that you're going to speak eventually. Those are the moments that our faith really has an opportunity to evolve and grow and transition into real faith rooted in love. Pain actually creates the strongest foundation sometimes. If everything was good all the time, where would God fit into all this? Where would you need him? Why would you pray? I mean, we have a direct line to God because we need him. We just do. And eventually, God does speak. Eventually, God does reveal himself. Eventually, restoration comes. Not because you earned it, not because Job earned it, but because God is faithful. And if you're faithful to him, he's faithful to you. So if you're listening to this and you're in a hard season right now, I want you to hear that your story is not over. Your pain is not wasted. Your faith is not unseen. There may be things happening right now that you don't understand, and that's okay. Like Job, you may not know what's being said about you in heaven, but could you imagine if God is up there saying, my servant Janie, she's just so faithful. She's so good. I love her so much. Look at her going through these painful moments, and yet she's still worshiping me through it all. And I'm just using me as an example because I don't know your name, but insert your name into that sentence and make it about you. You may not know how God is working behind the scenes, but you can trust that God knows exactly where you are, and more importantly, he knows where you're going. Just like Job, there will be moments when God reveals himself, when clarity comes, when healing begins, when redemption unfolds. I don't want to give away the end of the story here, but at the end of Job, God does show himself, and Job is blessed beyond measure. And we'll get there eventually in the series, your job isn't to have it all figured out. Your job is to remain faithful, to remain hopeful, to remain in prayer, and to remain anchored in the truth that God has a plan, even when you can't see it. And so often when things work out a certain way, and I'm sure you can relate to this. Sometimes you're going through a really, really bad season, and then there's restoration and things all pan out a certain way. And you look back and you think, wow, this thing that God gave me at the end of this really painful season was so much better than I could have ever wanted for myself. The story that God is writing for you has a way better plot than you can possibly come up with. And I need you to trust me on that and trust God in that. So thank you for sitting with me today for this episode. I hope that this resonated with you. I hope it brought you comfort. I hope it reminded you that you're not alone in the waiting and in the pain. And if you're in a season that feels confusing, I pray that you find peace in knowing that God sees you, He loves you, He knows you, and He will reveal Himself in His perfect time. Until then, I will see you in the next one.